Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now, quite a few of you have been asking me for a while to make a video about pre-fight abilities in the game and kind of like a generic pre-fight guide. Quite shortly after starting to make this video, I realized I will likely have to make some follow-up videos with kind of in-depth tips and advices and examples. But this video is just going to be a general overview of all of the pre-fight abilities in game, how I personally group them, and note basically some of the more important ones and some of the more important details. So if I'm not mistaken, or if I haven't missed somebody out, I believe there are 15 champions in the game that have access to pre-fight abilities. Now, pre-fight abilities are basically an option to activate an ability before the fight starts, and that will affect how your champions function in the fight. Now, 2/3, so 10 out of 15 champions that we're going to be talking about, have pre-fight abilities that are unique to them and them specifically. There are a few tricks with them as well, which I'm going to go over, but in general, that means that they're not very interactive with the rest of the champion roster. However, there are two more groups, and group number 2 is pre-fight abilities that can affect a specific group of champion, like a hashtag or a class or something of the sort. And the group 3 is basically fully open extra pre-fight ability that would be available to any other champion in the game. So they have no limits. So it means you have a champion that can place pre-fight abilities, and any champion can benefit from that. And that is the third group. So let's start breaking down the first one, which is by far the biggest one. And we have 10 champions in this group. And here they also have kind of certain differences for their pre-fight abilities. Now, we have pre-fight ability that can be treated as a rare resource, as a commodity in Human Torch. With Human Torch, you're basically using pre-fight ability, get a better champion, but you can do it a limited amount of times, typically once per quest, unless he's awakened. Or, here is the trick, that Human Torch can place a pre-fight ability for another Human Torch of the same star level in any group mode. So in incursions, for instance, for the boss fight or in Alliance Quest or in Alliance War, your teammate can place Human Torch pre-fight for you, and you can enter the fight with your Human Torch and make use of that pre-fight if they are the same star level. It's very important to know because it can come in handy in some Alliance War situations whenever he's not banned forever, or Alliance Quest if he's popular there, or again, incursions at times, or who knows what's going to happen with this game in the future. But you can do that. I suspect you can do similar things with Guillotine 2099, possibly, or Diablo, but Human Torch is typically the most common example because that is kind of the commodity and the biggest value pre-fight ability. Then there are pre-fight abilities that are kind of like a double-edged sword, and champions like Diablo and Guillotine 2099, and to a degree Jubilee and Invisible Woman as well has that. I think the best showcase here would be Guillotine 2099, where you have X amount of pre-fights. You can activate 2 out of 3 pre-fights before every fight, but there is a cost to them. If you activate a pre-fight, your armor rating falls, which means you will take more chip damage, and your regeneration ability when you reach 15% health also falls. If you activate both of them, you basically have no armor up and no regeneration anymore, but you gain the abilities that are listed in the pre-fights. So it is either every 20th hit is guaranteed to be crit or something like that, or it is ability to health steal or power steal on the mediums if you've passed 100 combo. In case of Diablo, you sacrifice your attack and your poison damage for stun and armor break immunity, for ability to heal back energy damage, and for ability to nullify. So in ideal circumstances, in case of Diablo, if you don't need any of those abilities, you don't want to activate any of the pre-fights because you want as much damage as you can. However, when you need those pieces of utility, they are there, but you need to figure that out before you enter the fight. And then we have champions that just basically gain some sort of customization, like Venompool, like Sorcerer Supreme, like Stealth Suit Spider-Man, and Storm Pyramid X, which all basically kind of like let you adjust exactly either what your abilities are going to be throughout the fight or how you're going to start the fight. In case of Sorcerer Supreme, which mode you're starting in. In case of Storm, it lets you pick whether you want to be in Ice or Lightning Tempest from the very start of the fight, so on and so forth. So realistically, most of these pre-fight abilities are not that impactful. They're kind of 50-50. Like Howard Duck's pre-fight ability seems kind of not necessary. That ability should always be enabled, period. And, you know, with Invisible Woman, people kind of hardly rely on it. And some of them are more successful, some of them are not. But these are the most common pre-fight abilities that we have in game in these champions. Now let's take a look at champions that have pre-fight abilities that affect a group of champions. And there are two important distinctions right off the bat in between War Machine and Apocalypse. Apocalypse basically has what you would call a persistent pre-fight ability. As in, Apocalypse grants a pre-fight ability to a champion, and then that champion has it for the remainder of the quest. That is quite rare, in fact. It's only Apocalypse and Odin who can do that, who we're going to talk about later. But typically, for most part, if you activate pre-fight ability, they only last for that one specific fight. And that is what War Machine does. So you activate pre-fight ability, and that only lasts for a single fight. Apocalypse one lasts for entire quest. Odin one lasts for entire quest. The rest of them pretty much just that one fight. So let's go and take a look at War Machine. So what War Machine does. War Machine can only use his pre-fight abilities on tech champions. He starts the quest with 2 charges, but you can gain charges by winning fights with War Machine. Like with most of these champions that can apply pre-fight abilities to larger group of champions. And then if you have any pre-fight activated, champion who is benefiting from those pre-fights gets a 10% attack boost, which is quite handy. And then you can pick one of the three you can pick any of these 3 pre-fight abilities, burning down a charge. You can activate all 3 of them at the same go if you have enough charges as well, so you can kind of like stack them over. And one pre-fight ability that gives any tech champion cleanse charges, where you can automatically purify 2 debuffs from your opponent, can be very useful for some tech champions to get rid of Liquid Courage Double Edge immediately. And other than that, you can purify something like a Power Lock or Armor Break that would perhaps affect the champion at the very beginning. So there's definitely quite a lot of versatility in that. Second pre-fight ability for War Machine is that you can gain energy resistance based on your current armor rating. That also can be situationally extremely useful to mitigate, let's say, Cold Snap damage, because that's energy damage, or to mitigate Magic's damage, or, you know, any sort of energy damage you can mitigate on any tech champion based on their armor rating, kind of giving them a pseudo resistance. And then the last pre-fight ability that War Machine has access to increases your attack based on your armor rating and your debuff duration by 20% except stun. This is super handy for a ton of champions because there's a lot of tech champions that rely on debuffs, and many champions become kind of significantly easier to play and can get the best out of with this ability. And again, it's kind of like a nice and handy to have. The cool thing is that War Machine is also able to benefit himself from these pre-fight abilities, but again, and he's also enabled to let any tech champion benefit from these abilities. So that is War Machine. And then we have Apocalypse. Apocalypse has gone kind of completely different way. So it only can be used on mutant champions exclusively. And this is ability that works basically by consuming 4 charges that you gain by defeating opponents or via synergy. And then one champion gains a significant list of abilities, and, you know, he gets quite significantly better for the remainder of the quest. That, however, weakens Apocalypse, and, you know, you need to ramp up him back up because amount of charges determines how powerful and how much damage Apocalypse will have. So there is downside to using this ability for Apocalypse, which is actually quite often the reason why I often choose not to make a mutant a horseman, because I just value having a full-powered Apocalypse more. But there are plenty of situations where this is exactly what you want to do, and this is how you can boost up a champion, you know, significantly. So any mutant who has gotten Apocalypse's pre-fight ability is gaining 100% bleed resistance, so they basically become pseudo bleed immune and gain ability to heal from liquid, double edge at the beginning of the fight. So you kind of actually give champions the bleed resist, but with that, if you're running liquid courage double edge, you also kind of give them a regeneration ability. Then any mutant gains 50% prowess, which increases their special attack damage, 30% offensive ability accuracy, which is also occasionally really useful and really good for a few champions. You also gain ability to go unblockable whenever opponent purifies some of your debuffs, and this can be extremely handy against tenacity nodes or just skilled champions who purify everything. And then once in a fight, you go unstoppable. When hit, it can just save your life. So it is a very significant package of benefits, but again, there are downsides to Apocalypse for using this, and it can only be done on mutant champions. Right, and the last group of pre-fights is the ones that can be used on all champions. Now, a lot of people actually mistakenly think that Magneto House of X can only help heroes or metal champions. That's wrong. You can use guidance, you can use Apocalypse House of X abilities on a non-metal villain or mercenary champions too. But then they will only get 15% attack and will not benefit from the passive stun and will not obviously benefit from his synergy abilities with himself. But even when you use non-metal villains, this guidance still does something. Therefore, by definition, it kind of falls in this category where any champion in the game can benefit from this. But we're going to take it in order. So, Odin has 3 pre-fight abilities that he can activate once per quest, once each. You can activate all 3 of them simultaneously, but just for one champion. So basically you have 3 bullets that each do different things, and you can, just shoot them once. You can't refill them throughout the quest. What is important to know with Odin's abilities that they are actual active buffs, and significant amount of time that is more important than what those buffs actually do, because these buffs can interact with your champion own personal abilities. Like Red Goblin becomes significantly stronger and does more incinerates and armor breaks because he has additional buffs applied to him. He increases his power level for each buff that he has on him. Similarly, let's say Angela. Angela's signature ability benefits from any buff, each buff that she has on, and Angela, immediately gets a lot more powerful, let alone her special 3 gains increased damage. Even Venom increases his damage based on the amount of buffs that he has on, so Venom will have stronger SP3, so on and so forth. So there are a lot of champions that interact with having extra buffs or debuffs on opponent, and these abilities can play a significant role in significantly increasing power level for certain champions. But what do Odin's pre-fights themselves do exactly? So, well, the first one is Aptitude, where it limits them, where it increases the potency of your furies, of your cruelties or precisions, I believe, and I believe armor ups as well, if I'm not mistaken. Something like that. So it basically increases the damage bonus that you gain from your fury buffs or other damage improvement buffs, and that enables you to do more damage in general. So that's, it can be quite helpful to increase champions' damage output. Then you also have max damage protection, which basically limits the maximum amount of percentage of damage that you can take in a single hit. So for instance, if you eat a single hit special attack that would knock you out, its maximum damage can be limited to like 15% or 20%. I think 15 is the limit on the 6-star. So it limits the maximum amount of damage that you can get. So it's a sort of protection from damage. It's kind of like Magneto's signature ability, which can save anyone's life at times and can come in handy, but let's face it, it's not the strongest, free fight in existence. The last one can be extremely useful, though. It is shock resistance, up to 90% shock resistance, I believe, on a 6-star Odin. And that means that you can basically give almost a full shock immunity to pretty much any champion in a game, which is very, very handy because EMP modification is a painful node, or now we have in Alliance War bleed and shock biohazard, so bleed and shock hazard shift node, where if you have a champion that's bleed immune, you can give them this pre-fight. they'll be able to take that node relatively well. So Odin definitely has quite potent, versatile pre-fight abilities, and I really do like the fact that we have that in game. Now we're going to talk about Magneto, House of X. He's slightly different. His pre-fight abilities function effectively the same as War Machine, where you start with limited amount of charges. You can gain charges by winning fights, and then you spend 2 charges per fight to activate this one pre-fight ability that has different effects on different champions that you apply this for. And it's called Guidance passive, and basically everyone gains 15% attack increase, and if your champion happens to be a metal or a hero, then the champion for that one fight gets that parry stun turned into a passive stun, which has much more implications than it might sound on. Having obviously increase in attack rating is, neat, but the main thing is the fact that your debuff stun can turn into a passive stun. And that means that any shrug of abilities are immediately bypassed. So Korg can't shrug the stun off, so tenacity abilities don't work, so Kingpin can't shrug off your parries, so on and so forth. And that enables a ton of champions to do matchups a lot easier, and it is really helpful. It's one of the most valuable pre-fight abilities in the game. There's a good reason why, for a significant chunk of Alliance War season, this guy was getting banned. It's because it's that useful, it's that powerful. Another thing that I wanted to mention, that for Magneto House of X, he also has personal synergies with himself, not unlike some of the champions that I mentioned before, but in this case it is kind of even more important because those personal synergies grant all hero and metal champions additional abilities like extra attack on top of the 15% that we can get from pre-fight, and also increased ability accuracy. So there is additional benefit from using Magneto House of X pre-fight abilities, and that is that you boost all your hero and metal champions even further. And yeah, definitely in my opinion also an underrated solo champion. And perhaps the best one for the last, I think Mr. Fantastic is still criminally underrated. He's a utility machine, and he obviously himself uses his pre-fight abilities in his main kit, but it can significantly help everybody else as well in the game. He has wonderful synergies for different class of champions, but the pre-fights I think is really what kind of like help to serve as a final trump card for him, I suppose. So he has 3 different pre-fights. Each of them place a different debuff on the opponent from the very beginning of the fight. And you have access to 3 different debuffs. Similarly to White Magneto and War Machine, if you win the fights, you gain more charges, and then you can use more pre-fights to help other champions, and so on and so forth. And these pre-fights work for a single fight only. So the debuffs that you can place with Mr. Fantastic, starting with Petrify, to reduce opponents' regeneration rate and power gain by up to 40% on a 6-star champion. And that, I think, is arguably the most potent ability, because that means that loads of champions all of a sudden can heal reverse in combination with Despair and some of their natural debuffs. A lot of tricky power gain fights become significantly easier to do. And then there are some very interesting individual interactions with like Dr. Doom. If you have Petrify and Dr. Doom, he can't enter his Aura of Hazarath. So you can basically let any champion become significantly better against Dr. Doom as well. And that is definitely a very potent ability to have. And you can maintain these debuffs for entire fight if you are able to knock the opponent down every 15 seconds, I believe. Second one is Suppression. It reduces opponent's power. It reduces the amount of power opponent gains from combat power rate. And that is, again, just a very handy kind of thing that can help you be more aggressive. And the last one is ability that reduces damage over time effects that opponent inflicts on you, and then help you increase the amount of damage over time you do to your opponent. However, just like with Odin, for many champions, fair amount of time, the fact that these are additional debuffs that interact with their own kits is even more important. We have Night Thrasher, who gains extra burst damage for each debuff that you have an opponent, and gains extra extra precision, I believe amount. Then we have Luke Cage, who gains extra attack for each debuff on the opponent. We have Wasp, who gains extra critical rating for each debuff on the opponent. I believe there are quite a few more champions that can boost their toolkit and damage output just by the mere fact that the opponent has extra debuffs. And then obviously these own individual effects still can significantly help you manage the fight as well. But it's important to note what kind of champions have interactions with debuffs themselves, because we do have the very old and simple example is Electra. If opponent is suffering from a debuff, then opponent's defensive ability accuracy is reduced by 85%. With Electra, typically you would have to use a level 1 or have a parry stun active to access that ability. With Mr. Fantastic, you can activate that ability all the time for the entire fight without, worrying too much. You just need to keep knocking the opponent down a bit. And that is always the most fascinating thing that I have enjoyed about pre-fights, is these unique combinations with different champion utility kits. And you can create some very, very interesting combinations of champions. Like I previously mentioned, Red Goblin with Odin immediately becomes really powerful. And then we have Petrify, where any champion can, significantly hinder Dr. Doom thanks to that Petrify, so on and so forth. So that is kind of more generic guide on pre-fights. I do plan in some point in future to make a more detailed breakdown on perhaps each of these champions, or perhaps cover a couple of champions in an individual video where I will go specifically with which champions, which pre-fights, interact the most interestingly perhaps, and what kind of hidden gems we can find together. But I do hope that this pre-fight guide has helped at least some of you. Let me know if you have any more questions, and I will catch you guys later. See ya. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about